You know, as we were sitting at our table, Rolanda began describing this incredible partnership that they have in their community. And it was a partnership where people come together under one organization that is supporting each other. Each nonprofit independently underneath it that has chosen to collaborate together. They've been together for 10 years. And each of them has a slightly different purpose, but they've agreed to help support and accelerate each other. They advertise on each other's websites. They begin to really think together about how they can add to the commons together. Not just a broad commons and not in a I give you something, you give me something way, but rather the ballet school might be helping the after-school program, and the after-school program might be helping the next person. It's the idea, when I hear it, of what it looks like to be in a real community together. It's far more than a network. It requires interdependence. And as you think about that, we began asking that question at our table. Could you replicate that kind of interdependence to achieve something for our community, not just at a small community level, but at the national level? What would it look like if we all saw one another as part of a commons, if we recognize that our fate is inextricably interconnected, that what happens to that 20%, we can't achieve that gross national happiness index if 20% of our community isn't happy and well and thriving. You know, we've tried this experiment for our entire history where we've said that doesn't matter. And the results are obvious. I come from the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, where we believe data shouldn't drive what we do, but it should inform and guide us, and should give us the courage to change our course when we find that what we're doing isn't achieving the results we hope it will achieve. In fact, the model for improvement starts with, what is it that you're trying to achieve? How will you know you've gotten there? And what will you try to do to get there? And the reason it starts with those three questions is because we know that our best ideas, our brightest ideas, may not actually work in real life. It may not be what's needed right now. We've been trying an idea of creating all of this change in silos, of believing that we're all individuals who are not interconnected. We're a society where everybody pulls themselves up by their bootstraps, and if you haven't pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, that must be because you're not pulling hard enough. Or maybe your bootstraps aren't strong enough. I don't know.
Or you don't have boots.
Maybe you just don't even have the boots. If we were to measure our progress, and Wayne shared some measures of our progress, I think we would all say it's not working. We have twice the cost of any other country and have far worse results. So how do we change that? How do we begin a belief in interconnectedness and take that to actually begin to be interconnected together, to risk being vulnerable and interdependent? And do that in a way where we can ourselves know whether we are actually getting somewhere or not, where we have the courage to see that we're not getting where we need to go and course correct and change direction. When we created the idea of 100 million healthier lives, it was less about the number as a number and far more about saying that we have to be in it together to get there. Can your organization improve 100 million healthier lives? Or yours? Or mine? I don't know a single place that can help get to 100 million healthier lives. It requires all of us to do it together. We said we need a movement, but a movement that is in part about people growing together, but also about people coming together, about discovering together and learning together and having the courage to have the kinds of conversations that we began to have yesterday. And so as Bonnie and Wayne asked me to reflect on the power of networks, of what it would take to create networks of unprecedented collaboration, of focus on improvement to help us know whether we're really getting there, and a network that's powerful enough to change the system so that we don't continue to have the situation that we had the first thing that we talked about in the morning. I began to think about, as we've been gathering hundreds of partners who have said, I'd like to be part of doing this together across the country, who together have reached over 100 million people in the country. I've begun to think about what is it that different people do, and in fact, everyone's begun to think, what's my piece of this puzzle that I'd like to contribute to? What's the special sauce that I bring that's uniquely mine, that without this piece of the puzzle, the picture wouldn't be complete? And how can we help make sure that everybody's piece of the puzzle has an opportunity to be heard, that everyone's voice and wisdom is at the table? And as we think about sort of the different levels of this network that we've begun to build, and I think as I've been here over the last day and a half, it's been fascinating to see sort of the networks that are here. In a way, 100 million is a network of networks. It's not one thing. It's too big to have just one thing, right? You know, I've been looking at the different kinds of networks that we have. So the one thing that we've been finding, first, is that if you need to have a network, the first core principle is shared values and relationship with one another. That until we begin to know one another, begin to know that we truly believe we're in this together, that where I put and risk my significance for yours and my good for yours because we believe we're in this together, that you can't get there. That there's enormous power and strength, that, you know, we're in a country where everyone feels powerless to make a difference in this because we all feel depressed. Things have been this way for a very long time. And yet, as we give people the opportunity to come forward, to say this is a strengths-based network, we can build on the bright spots that Community Solutions has created in the 100,000 homes, that we at IHI, who've done 100,000 lives, would generously share what we've learned, and they would generously take that to a whole nother level, and then be helping other communities. As the Central Foundation learns deeply what it means to create relationship with one another. A part of what a network can do is help create bright spots where we accelerate each other's growth and development and learning together. But there's a different kind of network that I would invite us to think that this particular group has the potential to create that's very different than just one that's about a bright spot that can be accelerated. There are few networks and relationships that have the ability to create healing. In order to create healing, you have to have a level of trust and vulnerability that isn't common. It requires us to be in a system, and I'll tell you, when I look at everybody who's in 100 million healthier lives, most people wouldn't even be ready to get to the level that we talked about over the last day and a half. It requires a different kind of seeing of the world, a different piece of the world, that only a few people and organizations are ready to do, or maybe more are ready to do it, if we would invite them in to the kind of space that Samueli has created here. And so I say all of that, and wonder if I might share with you some of my story as we think about that, as it relates to what it means to create a network that's about healing. So some of you may know that I grew up in India, in Kolkata. I was born in a family that made about $10 a month, which meant that we were housed, but fairly marginally. We were housed in a place that lost electricity every single night, which was wonderful, actually. Not only did you not have to do homework quite as much, but I spent a lot of nights in the veranda with my mother. And my mother, who I actually think mothers may be the most important social determinant of health, was a math teacher. And so she'd ask me a lot of math problems. So I was telling Monty yesterday, I got relatively good at math. But she would also ask me to look around at the world that was right around me and to see how many people had so much less than we did and what it might look like to make a difference. In our neighborhood, everyone knew each other and looked out for each other. Some of you may live in neighborhoods that look like that. When I was 8 years old, we came to the United States, to Indiana. Indiana literally translates in Bengali to not India. And it wasn't. It wasn't. And on the one hand, this was a place of opportunity for us. My father had come to do his postdoctorate. He had gone to graduate school, and this was going to be our family's way out of poverty. My parents were so excited. I didn't have the heart to tell them that I was getting beaten up every day at school. I was one of 2 brown kids in the entire school because I couldn't bear to break their heart because they had sacrificed everything to get to there. And you know what happens when you're in a situation like that? You develop walls, right? You protect yourself. I became tough because that's what I needed to do to protect myself. I became closed. And there were very few people. There were maybe 6 kids at school that I talked to on a regular basis, and everybody else was outside the safe zone. And that's how they would have perceived it as well. I knew at some point, this isn't how I wanted to live my life. Around the 7th grade, we moved to Arizona. And in Arizona, suddenly things were different. There were lots of brown people around first. So I realized this might be different, might be okay. And people seem to be talking. I'm being totally honest. This is how I was feeling. And I started loosening, and I realized if I kept acting the way I did in Indiana, in Arizona, I would stay that closed person. So for 6 months, I didn't talk to anybody. Not because I was choosing to be closed, but because I wanted to change the way I was acting and thinking in the world. And so slowly, I opened again and became someone who could think about being in relationship with others. I began to develop friendships and relationships. And over time, it's hard to believe now that I spent that time when I was so closed to the world. And yet, part of the reason that I was motivated to not stay closed has to do with this poem, and I hope I might share it with you. It says, "I will not die an unlived life." It says, "I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear of falling or catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days to allow my living to open me, to make me less afraid, more accessible. To loosen my heart until it becomes a wing, a torch, a promise. I choose to risk my significance, to live so that that which came to me as a seed goes to the next as a blossom, and that which came to me as a blossom goes on as fruit." If I hadn't had that environment which allowed me to come open, and a group of people that surrounded me, that allowed me to grow into the person that I could live my life to be, it wouldn't be possible. So when Tyler yesterday spoke of resilience as a bouncing back, I don't see resilience so much as a bouncing back as what happens when acorns and pine cones go into a fire. They close in. They can survive for years that way, closed and walled, until it's safe enough to come out again. And so when we think about our human interconnectedness, and when we think about the cost, not just to our gross national happiness, but to our unlived potential as a country when we allow inequity to continue? It's actually all of the unlived potential of everyone who's chosen and who's decided it's not safe for me to come out, to be who I am, and to live my potential. And I say that because we can't afford that as a country. We can't afford that as a country. But a network that creates the kind of depth and trust and relationship to create healing, to allow for people to open, is a different kind of network than simply a network that's about breaking down power barriers, or breaking down, or even creating innovation, or even spreading bright spots. And so I just invite you to consider what it might be like for this group to be a network that's about creating healing and equity and helping to unlock untapped potential.